There are so many aspects, Emilia, I want to talk to you about because of your well-rounded academic background that you have in finance, in psychology, neuroscience, and you were in corporate America, and now you are a leadership coach. And ooh, I love it, mental health coach. So, okay, so first and foremost, let's talk about Evolve Ventures.
Yes,
Okay,
evolve.
that is your baby.
That's my baby. My
That's your
goodness.
baby. Let's talk about the whole idea. When was the idea born? How was it born? And talk to me about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Evolve Ventures is my baby, as you mentioned. And I often say it's that, when you own a business, it is the living, breathing essence of who you are. And Evolve is far more than just the living, breathing of that. It is my soul. And some people say don't connect your soul to what you do in your business, but I adore what I do. And that's an understatement. So I hope that that comes through. So Evolve Ventures initially started actually as a podcast, which was just simply the Why Power podcast. And that rolled out around 2019, right around when COVID dropped. So kind of interesting way in which it started. I was like always obsessed having conversations like this, Sheida. Obsessed with learning. That was something that I always felt super compelled to do in terms of having conversations with people that gave a crap about other people, about improving the world that we live in, and about honoring the deeper question as to like, why are things as messed up in the world the way in which they are, for lack of better words. And so that started as the Why Power podcast. I had met my co-host Bianca Thomas actually in martial arts. We often tell the story where she was the only female that could really handle the punch in the face that I was giving because at the time I
Oh,
was
yeah.
yeah, at the time I was training as
For
a
self
Muay Thai.
defense.
Yeah, for self defense, but also because at one point I was like, "Oh, this might be really good. I'm a very strong female athlete, so let's see what we can do with this." And then I understood how it can really hurt your brain if you get in the ring, and so Muay Thai is the art of 8 limbs, and so she was the only female on the mat that could handle the strength that I had as a woman athlete. So
Interesting.
that was very fascinating. So we met and she's like, you know what? Like, I'm loving learning from you. And we, after and in between sessions on the mat, we would have dreams about, or we would have conversations about dreams and goals. And I would always have the question, like, why are things the way that they are? And love dialogues around that. And lo and behold, we became really close friends. After, the COVID-19 hit, it was the Why Power podcast that came into production. We started interviewing podcast hosts such as yourself and whatnot, and we had conversations on conversations. And before long, it was so incredible because we had a huge community base that loved the dialogues of what we call deeper talks and inner work. And Bianca at the time, she was on track to get her licensed mental health counseling degree too. So it was just two parallel peas in a pod. I was having studied psychology and finance all the way in the background, and then on my track to go into neuroscience and trauma and everything like that. So she and I held two very parallel tracks in the mental health industry. And then before we knew it, the Why Power podcast turned into Evolve Ventures because oh my goodness, we saw the way in which Alexa and the technology was evolving. And when we, pretty much asked Alexa, "Hey Alexa, play the Why Power podcast," it came out to say playing the White Power podcast. And we were like, whoa, no, that's not at all what we want. That's not our podcast. So we changed that over to Evolve Ventures. And then, before we knew it, we were seeing clients all over the world.
Wow.
In Sheida, we were having conversations on the podcast that people never talked about. And before we knew it, we were seeing like such a huge opening where we uniquely could step into this world of adding value to leading leaders from within and breaking one limiting belief at a time. And that's where the
Ah,
crux of where I live is.
okay, this is the third time so far. You give me goosebumps. Last time when we talked, it's just beautiful. So beautiful.
Thank you.
Tell me more. Tell me. I'm sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt.
No, this is yeah. So before long, Shada, we were seeing people all over the world, and it was I'd say it was a really empowering thing because when you and I first talked, this found me. This work, I say, found me because it helped me understand who I am at a deeper level. And that's one of the things when you get into, I think, mental health and leadership and the inner work that we do.
Mhm.
If you love these deeper conversations, you inherently have this feeling that I want to learn more and I want to add value and serve others in their pursuit of understanding this life, understanding where they fit, understanding how they can be the best version of themselves. And I didn't realize that I wasn't the only one seeking that endeavor. And that was such a big and bold experience for me because I remember when I was really, really young, I was the only middle child in the family and one of three. And growing up, I was raised by an entrepreneur family. And that added a lot of value in my business background.
Right.
But one of the things that I've learned over time through psychology and learning about trauma and families and the multi-generational patterns of epigenetics is I felt like this black sheep in my family. I felt like this individual in my family that like really gave more craps, for lack of better words, than other people around me. And I didn't understand, why was that? Why were the adults who were here supposed to protect us, supposed to help make this world a more meaningful place? It seemed like we're like kind of offline. And so it's been quite a journey of learning. Yeah, of learning and understanding how everyone is trying to do their best, but sometimes their best isn't enough, and that's okay. And so working with individuals around the mental health, around leadership, and how traumas that happen at a very young age stick with us unless we do the work, that's where my bread and butter has been for the last couple of years. And so that's been extraordinary. So such a journey, so many areas we could go, but yeah, that's where it started.
Oof, great. So lovely. What sparked your passion for leadership coaching though? Because you
Mm,
have all these different aspects that you could focus you focused on mental health and leadership
yeah.
coaching like as your primary practice, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
will get to the mental health aspect
Yeah.
later on, but let's just touch base on the spark behind the leadership coaching. Why not just coaching?
Yeah, absolutely. Leadership coaching. It was an interesting journey when I entered into corporate America, went into the biotech space, really loved and found my way into a blend between IT work, so information technology, and I was pretty much the liaison, if you will, during that time with HR and trying to figure out how can you have the technology advancements that help a business really evolve and get better. And we often would say nothing in organizations runs if it weren't for IT, but you
Yeah.
don't know that unless something's broken. And so I would work with people who were very, I don't want to say robotic, but very if then statements, very engineer like software engineer. So very unique personality type. And then I would also try to have them collaborate with a lot of HR. And
Mhm.
so, before long, I started to see this giant gap when it came to the development aspect of leaders. And specifically, I would work right there with the C suite. And that was something that in my journey, I had the privilege and the humble journey of working alongside a lot of C suite executives. And between my curiosity to learn as to why they operated the way that they did and also my humble work ethic, I got very, very close to a lot of C-suite executives. And I started to see how the ripple of influence, how it obviously would start at the top. But as it pertained to this HR and this IT battle that I often would see, not just in the organization that I worked for, but a lot of organizations that I worked with, I saw this through line that I've been seeing my entire life. And I said, you know what? This through line is that there's a gap in leadership development. I had consulting businesses come in and try to help these businesses get better, help these teams get better. And I'm not going to put any negativity out there, but what they wanted over here was collaboration, improvement, metrics driven success. And then what they actually did was so different. And so that always fascinated me as to why is leadership not really taking this development seriously? Why is when there's budget cuts, for example, leadership and development is the first thing that usually gets the chop, right? Because a lot of the time there's not the transactional value that you can see if you're saving costs. Okay, maybe you'll snip some subscriptions and maybe that will improve the business, right? But when you look at leadership development, it is an investment and it pays dividends when you have the right people in that chair. And so I saw this huge gap that leaders are not taking that responsibility to do what's hard, but what's right for the organization. And that ripple effects to so many people. And for my humble opinion, a lot of people didn't take leadership, that responsibility, really seriously, because they're impacting people's lives. And if they just cut jobs, that would make them like be able to handle the issues that were systemic root issues that no one was addressing. So when I saw leadership as, one of the legs of coaching, and I learned that there was like this executive development and whatnot. It's like, that's what I've been kind of doing my whole life. So I guess we got to label it that. And what that's brought me to is a very intimate insight in leaders and organizations, areas that when you're at that quote unquote top of the ladder, there's a lot at stake, there's a lot at risk, and there's a lot of responsibility to be mindful of how you impact everyone beneath you or aside you. And the hierarchical business structure has been something that I think has a time and place. But as a woman in business, I also really want to see more women at the top and helping those things that are so unique to women's leadership. I want more organizations to really benefit from that. So that was the primary driver. I saw a gap. I saw an opportunity. I saw something that was extremely ripe in terms of my strength points. And, I just jumped on it. And from there, it's been opening so many doors that I would never want to undo, because I've seen so many things now that I'm grateful for. And it's had me impact, like the impact that it's had on me to be able to impact so many other leaders has been extraordinary. So it's another journey that I've taken, and it's, like I said, it's another one that's kind of found me.
What kind of barriers do you think that women have that is limiting them basically from getting to the top?
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you think those barriers are within us, or they are outside of us? And how can we overcome them?
Yeah, Sheida, thank you for that question. That's such a beautiful question. What I've found is that there's multiple barriers, and there always will be barriers. And that's one of the most challenging things. And I also think the most exciting thing, because I know women are one of the most resilient creatures in this entire world. And not like saying anything about the guys, but well,
that's true.
It is true. And
believe it or not,
when we start to look at the statistics, what the pain that women can handle and endure, I think it's 44 on an actual pain scale, 44 times what men can. And I am amazed at what women have had to go through as a result of systemic issues against women and systemic biases against women. And so if we were to separate a little bit from the internal barriers and the external barriers, I would love to really highlight and put on a pedestal the external barriers. And I think that we'll start there, and then let's go inwardly, because I think they're what we call reciprocal. And so they feed each other. And I know that every single woman that's going to listen to this, she's going to resonate with this. She's going to know this, because whether it's at the playground, or whether that be at the lunch tables in high school or grade school, the same dynamics operate when it comes to executive leadership situations and retreats and whatnot. So unfortunately or fortunately, it really depends on internally how you see it in your perspective. There's going to be barriers. So the external barriers, the biggest primary one, there's an amazing book that highly recommend anyone reads, called Invisible Women by Isabel Criado, which essentially showcases how many external barriers there are for women. But the primary one that I'll take more of a psychological lens on is the systemic biases against gendered women. So there are a lot of people who are misogynistic out there and that don't want to see women succeed. And that's just because of the small ego that they've had to live within, unfortunately. And because ultimately they are threatened by women and how competent they are. You know, when you start to look at the statistics around females that are in the workplace, females are starting to outpace, and I want to say for 3 to 7 years now have been starting to outpace men, just speaking from a gender standpoint, in the workplace. And so what is that doing from a leadership dynamic? The external barriers, yes, there's going to be biases against women. So one of the ones that I've seen primarily that women have had to navigate through and bust is that quote unquote glass ceiling. So, you know, the competency factor that plays out in terms of the pay gap, right? There's still a pay gap when it comes to women in leadership, and not just even in leadership. This is just in general, right? So think about it from a access to resource standpoint. That's just if you get the job. There are, even before in the hiring processes, there is now with the advent of technology. And again, I'm so pro technology. I think it really depends on how we use it that impacts the negativity aspects on women. But there's technology that will scan resumes. There's technology that will already do that hiring process for you, that will eliminate you if you even have a specific name that is more gendered female. And so from everything from the hiring process to actual when you're in the ring with the big dogs, there are external barriers that unfortunately will always be there. And again, I say this with empowerment at my heels, and I hope you feel that, because women are natural born leaders. I really have seen that time and time again. They are willing to give without getting. And that is something that I see again and again. So the external barriers between biases, between pay gaps, between even just when you look at the ladder of, I call it the old boys club. When you look at corporate America, there's a lot of, let's step on this shoulder of this mentor to be able to get to wherever you want. And everyone will rally, you know, for my male clients, they'll rally. Yes, there's competition, the pecking order and whatnot. But when it comes to women, it's like, whoa, I don't know if this mentor is going to be good for you because of XYZ, or this sponsor, I don't know if you should really consider that. There's a lot of people's opinions that are unsolicited that have this undercurrent of biases built within it. And so that one thing can very much infuriate any woman who's ever been held back and held down and or given a barrier and asked to jump or jump out high. But then there's the internal barriers, and I can keep going, but those are the primary biggest ones, the unconscious biases that are inherently there because of the systemic issues around women. And don't even get me started on, you know, the different diversity of women and female minorities, and the stats around that is alarming. Even when you look at like Latinx or African American women too in leadership, and holy moly, how much the biasy against women, it's really unfortunate. And it's the call and the cry that I tell clients and I tell people that I'm around to help us help women more. But the internal barriers are something that I work on that no one really sees, that where people get really vulnerable with me behind the scenes, I wish I could put their voices on an ampliphone, just because of the fact that these are internal barriers that we fight every single day. And no one knows that fight, right? You ever hear, Sheida, that quote where be kind to people because you really never know what they're going through?
Yep.
It couldn't ring more true because of the fact that what women experience on the day-to-day, you know, that those external barriers, and again, men are not exempt from this. I know that to be true deeply, deeply in my bones. And I experience that on the conversations that I have. But women behind the scenes, the internal barriers, one of the biggest ones is I'm not enough, right? When we talk about limiting beliefs, that is one that is so pervasive because of the external forces that are at play, that before a woman can even begin to imagine herself in a role, especially a role of power, she has these internal narratives and these dialogues that are going which are called automatic thoughts and automatic negative thoughts, because they're not necessarily serving her, producing or helping her to climb whatever success ladder or deepen her levels of fulfillment or joy or vulnerability or emotional capacity, right? This I'm not enough epidemic is really getting to women, because before they can even submit a resume, before they can go on stage and interview for a role, there's a dialogue that's happening from what we call an inner critic, or a very protective part that's so fearful of what is going to happen or what has already happened, remembering that in our bones, in our central nervous system, in our fascia, right? That is preventing us from taking those leaps. So the internal barriers are the far more sneaky and insidious ones, only simply because we inherently, and I say, wait, we, because I'm not exempt from this, right? Like no one's exempt from our internal narratives. That's not necessarily super supportive. You know, even before I get on a podcast or before I have an interview, there's a voice that's like, remember the fact that you had memory issues growing up? Yeah, you're not going to really remember your bio. Like, it's like, girl, that's okay. That's okay. Be human, you know? But that's this insidious one from my perspective, because we have so much shame around our internal narratives, the internal biases. So these are our limiting beliefs, right? And what makes up our internal limiting beliefs are those thoughts that we have. And studies show, I always say this to clients, Sheida, which is like really helpful because I found it to be grounding, growth math, where we have between 12,000 and 90,000 thoughts per day. Everyone has a different activity level in their brain, but when we have that many thoughts, and a lot of these are happening unconsciously, 75% of those thoughts are repetitive. 95% of them are negative. So if you imagine the internal barriers of a female or a female executive or anyone that is experiencing their day-to-day, what their current limiting belief is. So for example, the I'm not enough. For me, it's like, I'm not lovable. There's a part of me that has such a wrapped in, and we can go into that if you want, but has this narrative that's not true, but has this narrative that puts and perceives everything that we do in the world through that one lens of I'm not enough, or I'm not lovable, or I'm not worthy, right? There's so many different lenses. And so you end up having the 95% of those thoughts are negative. What are the odds you're going to get yourself out of that box before you go and have that interview, or before you go and acquire those leadership skills as a female, right? Before you go and sign up for this course that's going to unlock you. It's really unfortunate. And like I said, if you have a mindset, if you have empowered women around you, it is so invigorating, because when you learn to unlock yourself from within, and when you learn how not to have shame around those thoughts and not fuse with those thoughts, and you learn how to navigate your inner critic or your exiled parts or your different parts of you, it's like, whew, okay, they want to call me crazy, I'll show them crazy, you know? So it's yeah, there's a lot of beautiful things in that. So, but one of the biggest internal barriers to kind of round this out is those limiting beliefs, and how they impact us.
It does resonate deeply. Thank you for sharing that. We will get back to the internal parts shortly. Before we move on, I would like to actually ask you this and get your opinion around what you think the role of your own kind is in your life. How would we and how should we treat each other as women, and how should we support each other as women going through all this external limitations that you mentioned, to support each other?
I really appreciate that question too, because it's, my perspective is going to be one of many. I wonder if we were to gather a group of women in the same room, what would they say? And, I've often been in rooms like that, and it's really amazing. It makes you want to cry, some of the things that women will say, because the I think that there's a lot of pressure on women to support women. However, one of the biggest things that women inherently do unconsciously is that there's a big comparison bias that's even getting in the way before women can give support, right? And when I say can, it's more of a capacity challenge that we as women are confronted with. And I'll give an example. My business partner, Bianca, she, for a long time, she and I say this with all the love, but she didn't tell me at the very beginning how intimidated, how threatened she was by me. And I didn't even know how intimidating or threatening I was. And she said, like, I hid from you for 4 years. Like, there's no way I could help support you and see you win and to the capacity that really you deserved as a woman, because of the fact that I was so caught up in my own stories and my own limiting beliefs that I saw there was a part of me that saw you as a threat to my success. You've done nothing but help me succeed. You've done nothing but help me flourish and grow and be this incredible human being. And she would say this now, but back then she had a part of her that was thinking in what we call a limited mindset, a fixed mindset, and a zero sum game mindset, where if I give and support to you, Emilia, that's going to take away from me. And so I think the first step that we can all support one another is really, and it might sound cheesy, but I stand behind it 1,000%, is we need to learn how to support ourselves. And that is the stepping stone that then inherently allows us to naturally give and support one another. Because, for example, using Bianca, and I know she wouldn't mind me sharing this, for her, and you can even see her growth journey in this, because she's now just blossoming, because she's had the humility to really say, ooh, I have some really wounded parts that didn't allow me to really celebrate other women's success and really help them, support them, grow and whatnot. And we joke about it now because I was so naive and I didn't know the impact. And so now I do. And so that putting the mask on yourself analogy, that gives what I've observed through clients and through other women support groups and whatnot, that gives women the ability to override this comparison bias that women inherently have. Oh, she's better than me. Oh, she's skinnier than me. She's this and that. She, like all of this unconscious pecking order type, very primal thought patterns that are only there when we have and when we are coming from a space of lack and or that zero sum mindset, which is if I give and support her, that's going to take away from me. And so I often really try to be mindful and steward my own garden. I say that because sometimes those thoughts will come out when we're really tired or we're not feeling the best about ourselves, or maybe we have, like me today, I have horrible hair day in my opinion, but that's okay. And giving support to myself is what's going to help me support every single woman in my corner. And if I don't show up with that, then I am thinking from a zero sum game. I can't go and do the next step, which is what this foundational aspect, from my opinion, really does come into play, which is when you have that, I am going to care for myself, not out of a place of I'm concerned about being selfish, because women have enough of internal barriers right there, right? But coming from a place of I am worthy of giving myself that support that I will inherently ask and or need from someone else. And when you start there, you can override that comparison set that we have, that comparison bias that inherently comes through. And then from there, that step is really going in and looking at more of the dynamic support system. I call it a spider web with some of my clients because it draws a really vivid visual. If you're at the center point as someone who needs support, right? You're a woman who needs support and you're venturing into your own venture, or your abyss, whatever that growth journey is. We are women who have needs. We are women who need support, and you want to create your web in a way that is meaningful for you. And that web looks like putting people in your corner that really want to see you win, that really want to see and have the emotional capacity to be there when you're not winning, to be there when you're not successful, to be there when you're struggle bus city, and not have that impact their image of you. And so again, how we can be there for women, it looks like not just the like surface level, like, we support you, although that does help, you know, something as small as sharing a Facebook group, or something as small as like, you know, nowadays when we look at technology, it's like a thumbs up on this post, a thumbs up on that post, you know, like little tiny things like that can go a long way, especially for females that are trying to do something. But besides that, there are so many things like, for example, Sheida, right now there's it's been really cool to see a lot of the female leaders that I've had the privilege of impacting. They'll share books, and they'll share books, and that's just a small way in which we can support other women, because in books specifically pertaining to female hormones, because a lot of women haven't really learned about their own fertility, their own central nervous system, their own endocrine system, their own bodies, and have been learned to disconnect from their bodies. And so something as small as sharing a book of like, hey, I was reading this book about endocrinology, about our, you know, sharing something like that I think you might really love. That's something very small. And those small things stack up. We often underestimate the compound effect of that level of support that, you know, I wish I could turn to my grandmother, but she doesn't necessarily have the same level of support, and she might not know what support looks like for me. But as women helping women, I always think it's putting the mask on first, understanding what needs we have, and then clarifying that so that we can, without shame, ask for support to others and freely give that when that comes around, because it's a privilege to help our sisters. I really do. I really
You
do see
explained
that.
it so beautifully.
Mm-hmm.